Hey, listener. Welcome to a deep dive that's going to feel like we're giving you classified intel.
Yeah, think of it like you're prepping for a promotion board, and this time the stakes are high.
Really high. This isn't just some casual overview. We're going deep into the inner workings of the Nigerian army.
Straight from recently declassified military documents, too.
So buckle up, because this is pure gold for anyone who wants to understand the challenges and potential solutions facing not just the Nigerian army.
But really, militaries around the world.
Okay, let's jump right in, and trust me, this first scenario is a doozy troop rotation.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
We're talking about thousands of soldiers stuck in active combat zones, some for years beyond their initial deployments.
The document specifically points out soldiers serving 4 or even 7 years.
Imagine the impact on morale families.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem.
Absolutely. And the source proposes a pretty radical solution, a centralized database.
So like a system that tracks deployments, flags upcoming rotations, even sends reminders to units to make sure those replacements happen on time.
It's not just about streamlining logistics, though.
It's about taking care of the people who put their lives on the line.
Exactly. Giving them some predictability, some sense of control over their own lives.
Can you imagine the stress of not knowing when you'll be reunited with your family? But then the document throws a curveball. What about units formed right in the heart of the conflict zone?
Right. They don't have a home base to rotate back to.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
But the source gets even more specific. They propose that units in the newly formed 19 Brigade.
Could be rotated by troops from the 2nd Division.
It's about finding creative solutions within the system.
Okay, so we've tackled the rotation puzzle. Now let's talk training backlogs.
Oh yeah, this is a classic one.
Picture this. A wave of newly commissioned officers eager to serve, but the training system is completely overloaded.
The pipeline is jammed.
Essential courses, staff, colleges, everything's backed up.
It's a growing pain for any military force. And the source offers a 3-pronged attack, short, mid, and long-term solutions.
I like it. Hit them from all sides. So what's the first strike?
In the short term, maximize existing infrastructure.
Okay, so set up additional training divisions.
Maybe even repurpose facilities from other departments.
Think outside the box.
Exactly. And for the midterm, why not tap into the expertise of allied nations?
Send officers abroad for training.
It's a win-win. Shared knowledge, stronger bonds, and it takes some pressure off domestic resources.
Smart. But let's not forget the long game.
The source is very clear on this point. Invest in new facilities, expand capacity to meet future demand.
Because this isn't just a Nigerian problem.
It's a global trend. Militaries everywhere are struggling to adapt training to keep pace with technology and the changing nature of threats.
It's like trying to hit a moving target. Speaking of shifting landscapes, let's talk about the resource allocation dilemma.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
The Nigerian army has to juggle resources between the gradually stabilizing northeast and the increasingly volatile northwest and north-central regions.
It's a constant balancing act.
How do you decide where to deploy troops and equipment when the situation is so fluid?
This is where data becomes crucial. The source suggests using real-time assessments of threat levels, capabilities, and potential flashpoints.
So constant recalibration. Like playing chess on a board where the squares are constantly changing color.
Exactly. You've got to be thinking 3 moves ahead, anticipating your opponent's every move.
Now, this next point really surprised me. The document points out that despite having specialized training, the Nigerian army lacks a true special operations force capable of tackling those really complex missions.
That's right. And the source explains why currently special forces training is very siloed. You've got airborne experts, amphibious specialists, counterterrorism units.
They rarely train together.
Right. And that limits their ability to conduct those intricate, multifaceted missions that require a blend of skills.
It's like having a toolbox full of screwdrivers when you need a hammer.
Huh.
But what's the fix? How do you turn this collection of specialists into a cohesive force?
The document calls for a major overhaul. Bring those specialized skills together and forge them into a multi-skilled unit capable of taking on composite operations.
And don't forget, they need the right tools for the job.
The source mentions that many special forces units are still using standard AK-47s.
You're sending them into a surgical operation with a butter knife. What kind of missions could this revamped force undertake?
We're talking hostage rescue, infiltrating enemy territory, disrupting logistical networks.
High-stakes stuff.
Absolutely. This is where things get really interesting. Imagine a force capable of striking with precision, surgical accuracy, achieving objectives that were previously out of reach.
This brings us to another underutilized resource, the Women's Corps.
So much potential there.
But the source points out They're largely sidelined due to restrictions on deployment.
It's a major loss of talent and experience. The
Hmm.
Army is essentially operating at 85% capacity.
Because they're not fully utilizing the Women's Corps.
The document suggests expanding their roles in areas like training logistics and peacetime operations, and just as important, creating tailored career paths that allow them to rise through the ranks.
It's about recognizing their value and giving them the opportunity to contribute. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already, but before we take a break, let's tackle one last challenge, the rapid-fire round.
Bring it on.
We're talking IED threats, accommodation crises for returning troops, regulating social media use, maintaining morale during prolonged deployments.
It's the reality of modern military leadership.
And the source offers a mix of practical solutions and systemic changes.
For IEDs, it's about specialized training and procuring the latest detection equipment. For returning troops, it's about ensuring smooth transitions and providing adequate housing. And for social media, well, that's where things get really interesting.
Because it's not just about shutting down communication.
It's about finding that balance between operational security and respecting individual freedoms.
So how do you strike that balance?
The source suggests continuous education about the potential risks of posting sensitive information, regular awareness sessions on the Armed Forces' social media policy, and even involving the Cyber Warfare Command in monitoring activities.
It's a multi-layered approach, recognizing the evolving nature of warfare and the need for innovative solutions. But we'll dive deeper into these challenges in the next part of our deep dives.
Stay tuned, listener. Things are about to get even more insightful.
Season?
Yeah, CAO. All right, so we're back. And now we shift from those immediate issues to the big picture, the future of the Nigerian Army.
Looking ahead, crystal ball time.
Exactly. And the source dives into potential threats over the next decade.
Okay, so anticipating what's coming down the pipeline, trying to get ahead of the curve, what kind of threats are we talking about?
Well, the source highlights a few key areas that could reshape the whole security landscape. First up, climate change.
Climate change. Okay, so we're not just talking about hotter summers.
No. We're talking about resource scarcity, mass displacement of people, increased competition for things like water and land.
Those are the ingredients for instability conflict. A whole new set of challenges for the military to grapple with.
Exactly. It's not just about traditional warfare anymore. It's about understanding these complex environmental factors that can fuel unrest.
Okay, so climate change is a big one. What else?
Cross-border criminal activity.
So we're talking smuggling, human trafficking, arms dealing.
Networks that operate with no regard for national boundaries.
Like a hydra. You cut off one head, two more grow back.
Perfect analogy. And of course, we can't forget about the existing threats that are constantly evolving.
Groups like Boko Haram.
Right. Always adapting, changing their tactics,
Right.
finding new ways to operate.
So the document is saying the Nigerian army can't just react, they need to be proactive.
Predicting the enemy's next move, staying one step ahead. So what does the source suggest in terms of proactive measures?
Well, it outlines three key areas. First, investing in the military-industrial complex.
Okay, so developing the capacity to produce weapons, equipment, technology domestically.
Reducing reliance on foreign suppliers, bolstering national security.
Makes sense. Self-reliance is a powerful tool, especially in a world where alliances can shift and supply chains can be disrupted. What else is on the agenda?
Strengthening international collaborations.
Sharing intelligence, coordinating operations, working together to tackle common threats.
Recognizing that in today's interconnected world, no nation can stand alone.
Strength in numbers. And the final piece of the puzzle.
The source suggests carefully evaluating the use of private military contractors, PMCs.
PMCs. They can provide specialized skills resources, but there are also some serious risks involved.
Issues with accountability oversight, and the potential for these groups to become a destabilizing force.
It's a double-edged sword. You're buying expertise, but at what cost? The document encourages a cautious approach, weighing the potential benefits against the very real risks. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to something that really caught my eye. The source talks about understanding trends in emerging military technologies. It seems pretty obvious, but what does that really mean in practice?
It means recognizing that technology is reshaping the battlefield at an unprecedented pace. We're talking artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons systems, cyber warfare.
These have the potential to change the balance of power entirely.
It's not just about having the latest gadgets, though. It's about understanding how to use them effectively, recognizing their strengths and weaknesses.
And maybe even more importantly, developing strategies to counter these new threats.
Because if you're not adapting, you're falling behind.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom in on some specific challenges within the Nigerian army. The source raises some interesting points about training capacity and resource allocation.
Right. Let's start with the Depot NA, the main training facility for new recruits.
The document describes instructors and facilities as overstretched.
They simply don't have the capacity to train the sheer number of recruits needed to meet the Army's growing manpower needs.
So what's the solution? Build more barracks, hire more drill instructors.
The source outlines a phased approach. Short term, expand existing facilities and bring back experienced retired personnel to serve as instructors.
Tap into that reservoir of knowledge. Bridge the gap. What about the midterm solution?
This is where it gets interesting. The source proposes dividing recruit training into 2 phases.
Okay, 2 phases. I'm listening.
The first 3 months would focus on basic infantry skills, but with an emphasis on exposing recruits to a wider range of weapons and equipment.
So they're getting a taste of mortars, surveillance equipment, armored personnel carriers.
The whole 9 yards. This would take place at NASI, the Nigerian Army School of Infantry.
Okay, so basic infantry skills, but with a broader exposure to different types of equipment. And then what?
Then the second group, who would have been undergoing basic training at Depot NA, moves to NASI for similar training, while the first group consolidates their knowledge.
So they're basically swapping places.
Exactly. It's a relay race of training.
I love that analogy. And then what happens?
Finally, they merge for a final exercise before graduating.
Makes sense. Spread out the training load, utilize different facilities. And what about the long-term solution?
That's pretty straightforward. Build a second training facility similar to Depot and increase capacity, and spread the load even further. Now, the document also mentions a new document, the NASOP, for the protection of railway systems and major highways.
Okay, protecting critical infrastructure. That's a big deal.
It's all about securing vital infrastructure, ensuring the safe movement of people and goods. The document outlines a multi-layered approach to protecting these transportation lifelines.
So what kind of strategies are we talking about? Is it just about deploying more troops?
It goes beyond that. The source mentions using technology for surveillance, integrating local communities and settlers into security plans, engaging vigilante groups, and deploying troops based on credible intelligence.
So a holistic approach, leveraging all available resources.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that security is a shared responsibility, a collaborative effort that requires the involvement of multiple stakeholders. Now let's talk about a threat that's all too real for the Nigerian Army IEDs.
IED is a constant danger.
The document doesn't sugarcoat it. They're a major threat, especially for infantry units operating in hostile environments.
And they can be incredibly difficult to detect and disarm. So what's the solution?
The source stresses the need to step up counter-IED capabilities.
Okay, so we need more specialized training, better equipment. How do we make that happen?
Well, the source highlights the importance of reviving assault pioneer platoons within infantry units.
Assault pioneer platoons. What are those exactly?
These are specialized teams trained to handle basic engineering tasks, including detecting and disabling IEDs.
So they're the ones going out ahead of the main force, clearing the path, making sure it's safe for everyone else.
Exactly. And the source points out that dedicated engineer resources are often scarce, especially in active combat zones. So empowering infantry units to handle these tasks themselves is crucial.
Okay, so we need more assault pioneer platoons, but they also need the right tools. Right.
Absolutely. The source also stresses the need to procure modern detection and detonation equipment. You can't fight 21st century threats with outdated technology. Now let's shift gears and talk about a sensitive issue that's been making headlines: the arrest of military personnel, particularly armorers, for selling arms and ammunition to criminal elements.
That's a major breach of trust, a serious security concern. What's being done to address this problem?
The document acknowledges that these arrests have reached a worrisome dimension and proposes a multi-pronged approach to tackling the issue.
So what's on the table? How do you prevent something like this from happening again?
First, they recommend stricter vetting procedures for armorers, including thorough background checks on a quarterly basis.
So making sure that these sensitive roles are entrusted to individuals with impeccable records.
Exactly. They also suggest limiting the time an armorer can serve in a particular unit or formation to a maximum of 3 years.
Rotating them regularly to prevent complacency or, even worse, the temptation to engage in illicit activities.
Yeah.
What else?
To further tighten security, the source emphasizes the importance of thorough searches during de-induction training for troops returning from missions, as well as those going on leave or passes.
So preventing weapons and ammunition from being smuggled out of operational areas.
Right. It's about creating multiple layers of security, leaving no room for leaks. Any other recommendations?
Seems like they're really trying to crack down on this.
They are. The document also highlights the need for strict accountability during range classification and bush exercises.
So every single round fired should be accounted for.
Exactly. Personnel are required to complete ammunition accountability forms.
It's about creating a culture of responsibility where every bullet is tracked and misuse is not tolerated.
Now let's dive into a challenge that's unique to the digital age, regulating social media use among personnel deployed in various operations.
Ah, social media, the double-edged sword of modern warfare.
It's a tricky balance between respecting individual freedoms and ensuring operational security, and the source acknowledges the difficulty of this task.
So how do you strike that balance?
They suggest a combination of education awareness and enforcement.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
The source emphasizes the need for continuous sensitization of troops on the dangers of posting military-related information on social media.
Reminding them that loose lips sink ships.
Or, in this case, maybe compromise an entire operation. They also suggest conducting regular awareness sessions on the Armed Forces of Nigeria's policy on the use of social media, making sure everyone understands the rules of engagement in the digital battlefield.
So it's not just about telling them what not to do, it's about explaining why these rules exist.
The rationale behind them. And beyond education, there's the enforcement aspect. The document proposes increased monitoring of various social media platforms by the Military Police Intelligence Corps and other relevant directorates.
So they're keeping a close eye on what's being posted, looking for potential security breaches.
Exactly. A proactive approach, looking for red flags before they turn into full-blown crises.
And if they find something,
While they also suggest bringing in the big guns involving the NA Cyber Warfare Command in monitoring social media activities. These guys have the expertise and resources to track online activity and identify potential threats.
so it's a multi-layered approach, combining education awareness and some serious monitoring techniques. Now let's talk about something that's fundamental to any military force morale. The document highlights the fact that prolonged deployments, especially in challenging theaters like the Northeast, can take a toll on the well-being of personnel.
Absolutely. It's not just about physical hardship. It's about the psychological strain, the separation from loved ones, the constant pressure of operating in a high-stress environment.
And the source doesn't shy away from the darker side of this reality.
Right. They point out issues like drug abuse, declining discipline, psychological stress, the hidden wounds of war.
So what can be done to boost morale and address these challenges? Is it simply about providing more R&R?
It goes beyond that. The source outlines a comprehensive approach that includes both preventative measures and interventions for those who are struggling.
Okay, so a multi-pronged approach. What's the first step?
They recommend implementing mandatory drug testing for personnel.
Identifying those who are struggling with substance abuse and getting them the help they need.
And it's not just about punishment, it's about recognizing that addiction is a disease that requires treatment and support.
So what about those who don't respond to treatment? Those who continue to engage in drug use or other prohibited activities?
The document suggests implementing stricter penalties. It's about striking a balance between compassion and accountability.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about tailoring the response to the individual and the situation. Now, what about addressing the root causes of low morale things like prolonged deployments and separation from families?
The source is very clear on this point. Implement a realistic rotation plan.
Make sure that personnel aren't deployed for extended periods without a break,
Give them a chance to rest, recuperate, reconnect with their loved ones.
because burnout is a real threat.
And it can have devastating consequences. They also suggest enhancing financial emoluments for personnel deployed in operational areas.
So recognizing the sacrifices they're making and compensating them accordingly, putting your money where your mouth is, showing them that their service is valued.
Exactly. And the source also highlights the importance of ensuring that qualified soldiers are allowed to attend career advancement courses even if they're deployed.
So keeping their career trajectory on track, even in the midst of a deployment. Makes sense. What else?
The source advocates for promoting all qualified soldiers without any caveats on vacancies.
So no matter where a soldier is serving, if they meet the criteria for promotion, they get promoted.
Exactly. It creates a level playing field recognizing merit regardless of location.
It sends a powerful message. Your contributions are valued, and you have a path for advancement within the Army no matter where you're stationed. Okay, one final challenge before we wrap up this section. The document mentions that the de-induction of troops from task force units often creates accommodation crises in regular units.
It's a logistical nightmare. Many soldiers are sent straight from basic training to operational theaters like the Northeast.
So they're never actually assigned to a regular unit.
Right, so when their deployment ends, they have nowhere to go.
They come back from combat, ready to reintegrate into civilian life, and they don't even have a place to sleep.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
And the source proposes a three-pronged approach to tackling this issue.
Okay, hit me with it.
Short-term, prioritize posting de-inducted troops to units with less severe accommodation challenges.
So spread them out to minimize the strain on already overcrowded barracks.
Exactly. Midterm, streamline the discharge process, ensuring that retiring personnel receive their entitlement promptly and vacate their barracks accommodation.
Okay, so free up existing accommodation as quickly as possible. What about the long-term solution?
More construction? Build additional barracks to increase overall capacity.
So a combination of short-term fixes and long-term investments to address this ongoing challenge. Makes sense. Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more insightful point from the source. It describes the internal security landscape of Nigeria as complex in nature. What exactly does that mean?
It means that the security challenges facing Nigeria aren't easily categorized or solved. There are multiple actors at play, a wide range of threats, and a complex web of social, economic, and political factors that contribute to instability.
It's not a simple equation with a clear solution.
It's a tangled web, a puzzle with many pieces.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're peeling back the layers, exploring the complexities of modern military leadership, and grappling with real-world challenges.
And we're not done yet. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll zoom out even further, considering the broader geopolitical context and the global forces that are shaping Nigeria's security landscape.
Stay tuned, listener. Things are about to get even more insightful. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Nigerian Army. We've explored the challenges they face, the solutions being proposed, and even peeked into the future of potential threats.
And now we're going to zoom out even further.
That's right. We're going to consider the geopolitical landscape.
How global events impact Nigeria's security.
Because what happens on the world stage doesn't stay on the world stage.
It ripples out, and those ripples can be felt all the way in Nigeria. The document raises some tough questions.
For example, it specifically asks, how does the Boko Haram situation in neighboring countries
Niger, Chad, Cameroon.
and the Amazonia separatist movement in Cameroon impact security within Nigeria?
It's all about recognizing that security doesn't stop at the border. Instability in one country can easily spill over into another.
Especially in regions with porous borders and shared challenges.
The source really digs into the challenges of coordinating security efforts between nations.
Each with their own priorities and internal struggles.
And it highlights how these external conflicts can make things even worse inside Nigeria.
Exacerbate existing tensions, especially along religious and ethnic lines.
It's like throwing fuel on a fire that's already smoldering.
The document also touches on a controversial topic, state governments establishing their own armed vigilante groups.
That's a hot-button issue, for sure.
Communities are desperate for protection. They feel like the government isn't doing enough.
But then you have concerns about these groups operating outside the law.
Becoming uncontrollable.
Even fueling further violence.
So is it a good thing or a bad thing?
The document doesn't take sides. It doesn't say whether these groups are good or bad.
Instead, it encourages the reader to think critically about the potential consequences.
Who controls these groups? Are they accountable to anyone? Are they a temporary solution or a recipe for further instability?
It's about asking those tough questions.
Weighing the risks and benefits.
And ultimately making informed decisions. And that approach, encouraging critical thinking, is something we see throughout the document.
It's not about offering easy answers or pushing specific policies.
It's about pushing the reader, in this case you, to engage in deeper analysis.
To consider multiple perspectives and really grapple with the complexities of these issues.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about something that's been dominating headlines, the war in Ukraine.
What are the implications of this conflict for Nigeria?
The document highlights several potential impacts.
First, the disruption of global supply chains, especially for food and energy.
That could have a ripple effect on Nigeria's economy,
We're already seeing rising food prices and fuel shortages.
which can lead to social unrest and instability.
The document also points out that the influx of weapons from Ukraine could end up in the wrong hands,
Criminal gangs, insurgent groups.
making them more powerful and harder to combat,
It's like a shockwave from the conflict.
amplifying existing threats.
And there's another potential consequence that's often overlooked. The war in Ukraine could divert international attention and resources away from other crises.
Like the humanitarian crisis in the Lake Chad Basin.
So Nigeria, facing its own complex challenges, could find itself competing for attention and aid.
In a world increasingly focused on the conflict in Europe.
And that brings us back to the importance of a strong, adaptable, and resilient national security strategy for Nigeria.
One that can navigate these shifting global tides and address both internal and external threats.
Speaking of global trends, the document also tackles climate change.
It's not just an environmental issue anymore.
It's a threat multiplier.
That can make existing tensions worse and create new ones.
The source highlights potential impacts like increased competition for scarce resources,
Waterland.
displacement of populations due to rising sea levels, or desertification.
And more frequent and intense natural disasters.
All of these factors can easily lead to instability, conflict, and humanitarian crises.
It's a stark reminder that climate change isn't some abstract future threat. It's happening now.
And its effects are already being felt around the world, including Nigeria.
The document emphasizes the need to incorporate climate change considerations into national security planning.
This means investing in climate resilience, developing strategies to mitigate the impact of climate change, and preparing for the security challenges that are likely to arise.
It's about taking a long-term view
Anticipating future challenges.
and building a more sustainable and secure future for Nigeria.
Now, the source also touches upon the controversial topic of private military contractors, PMCs.
PMC.
What are the implications of using these groups in Nigerian military operations?
It's a tricky issue.
On one hand, PMCs can offer specialized skills and resources that might not be readily available within the Nigerian military,
They can also provide a degree of deniability.
allowing governments to distance themselves from controversial operations.
But the document also points out the significant risks.
Lack of accountability, human rights, abuses the potential for these groups to become a destabilizing force,
It's a double-edged sword.
weighing the potential benefits against the very real ethical and security risks.
The document doesn't take a stance for or against the use of PMCs.
Instead, it encourages careful consideration.
Of the potential implications, the need for strong oversight mechanisms, and the importance of ensuring that any use of PMCs aligns with national interests and values.
So, listener, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the internal challenges facing the Nigerian army, from troop rotations and training backlogs to the complexities of a constantly shifting security landscape,
But we've also zoomed out.
examining the impact of global events like the war in Ukraine and the growing threat of climate change.
We've discussed the need for a robust military-industrial complex, the importance of international collaborations, and the delicate balancing act of potentially utilizing private military contractors.
And throughout it all, we've emphasized the importance of critical thinking, thoughtful analysis, and a willingness to challenge assumptions.
This deep dive, fueled by real-world military documents, was just the beginning.
We encourage you to continue your research, delve deeper into these issues, and engage in meaningful conversations about the future of the Nigerian army.
Because these challenges aren't unique to Nigeria, they are global challenges that require global solutions.
In a shared commitment to building a more peaceful and secure world.
Remember, knowledge is power, especially when you're preparing for a career-defining moment, like a promotion board.
So stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive signing off.